Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks to Mother Jones and the Chicago Humanities Festival, and to all of you for being here for this conversation. David, thank you for being here for this conversation. Welcome back to Chicago.
Well, I love coming here, and thank you all when you could be home watching MSNBC. So it's really quite moving to see such a large crowd of live people. When I go on TV, I just have to imagine you being out there.
Well, and you've obviously done lots of talking and reflecting about the election, but now that we have the long spans of context that 4 whole days provides,
Yes.
I wanted to actually begin our conversation by digging into the implications of Tuesday's outcome, and then I want to talk more about your own reporting and that infamous and so important pivotal 47% video. But as it relates to Tuesday, in your view, why did the Republican Party have such success on Tuesday?
I think there are actually lots of reasons, and I wrote a piece the night of the election, which is what we have to do sometimes in terms of instant analysis, and I've been thinking about it days since. So I think you can look at this election through a couple of different perspectives. And I'll just ramble on for a little bit, cut me off when I've given you too many perspectives. I mean, to begin with, there's a 6-year itch, which everyone knows about, the 6-year into a 2-term presidency. The party that controls the White House usually gets a shellacking. People are just kind of antsy. It's very hard to be a successful president. There are very few presidents who, at the time of their presidency, are considered outright successes. So I think there's a natural, and everyone knows this is, Democrats are talking about this for years going into this election, that you're likely to take a hit. On top of that, I think it was a much bigger hit than a lot of Democrats and Republicans expected, whether it's your pal David Axelrod or even some, the Michael Steele and some of the conservative Republicans that I go on air with. Everybody was somewhat surprised that it was such a major wave for the Republicans.
Yeah, there was a sense it was going to be a good night, but they didn't realize it would be that good for that party.
Right, and they basically won everywhere except New Hampshire and a few other pockets. But Charlie Crist looked like a good bet in Florida. He lost a close race to Rick Scott, the incumbent governor. And in my neighboring state of Virginia, no one expected Mark Warner, who's considered a popular senator, to have a chance of losing, and he won by 12,000 votes, less than 1%. So even those few places where the Democrats won, it was very close. And you look at a state like Iowa, which 2 years ago elected Barack Obama, I think is from around here, elected Barack Obama by 6 percentage points. This time, they elected a senator who called for the impeachment of Barack Obama. Now, that's a big, big flip. And so we can go through all the demographics that, elections work for the people who use them, right? And so the way you tell what's going to happen in an election is figuring out who's coming to vote, what the electorate is. And weeks out of the election, polls were already showing that there was less enthusiasm about voting amongst the whole public than there had been in any of the last 3, 4, 5 off-year elections, midterm elections. But amongst the people who were looking to vote, there was a 20% gap between those who said they lean Democrats and those who say they lean Republican. So a 20% gap in a year that favors Republicans, and you could just, the exit polls bear this out. People who lean Democratic did not go out to vote. People who are angry about Obama, maybe who are somewhat excited about Republicans, even though the Republicans campaigned on nothing except anti-Obamaism, you went to the polls. Still in low numbers, but it's relative. as long as there
There's
are
just
more of them.
much more energy on the Republican
Yeah,
side.
it was a lot
of the
more, and
ledger.
and people, anger often is said is one of the best motivators in politics. Unfortunately, in 2008, Obama put his money on hope. It won because he was running against John McCain, in part, but also after the Bush years, it seemed right for the time. But I have sort of a larger, and I know I've rambled on, a larger overview, which is kind of pessimistic. Do you guys really want to hear this? Okay, you
That's
asked.
why we came.
You asked. And that is, I think we live in an age that's really being defined by uncertainty. This has happened in the past, but the revolution in finance led to a lot of jobs going overseas and deindustrialization. And then we had the information age, and people said, oh, we're all going to be information workers, right? But actually, thanks to this little thing called the internet, information workers can be overseas as well. And so we've had this, we had the recession that came about because of financial shenanigans, but it pulled the rest of us down. And the recovery ever since, has been widely noted, is really being not spread out across the public at large. Unemployment's down, but personal income is really flat, and it's been flat for 30 years. But people always, I think, had in the cyclical nature of the economy, still thought that things could get gradually better for themselves, or more importantly, for their kids. But I think that the last hit we took, the 2008 Bush-Cheney recession, which came about in part because of deregulation in the Clinton years as well, let's be bipartisan here, that really got people thinking in a different way. That things, that are not going to go, even if we're making some gains, we still are in a very precarious situation financially, economically. People are not, worried about the future for themselves and their kids. Right now, are we on the wrong track? This is what pollsters do. It's one of their key measurements. They ask people, do you think America's on the wrong track, on the right track? And I wrote this the other day, but I can't remember. But the numbers are like 67% say we're on the wrong track, and only in the high 20s say we're on the right track. And this is after, Obama has succeeded in putting in policies that seem to have raised employment to a certain degree and have passed Wall Street reform, even though it's not as strong as a lot of people wanted, and has gotten health care reform to work more than not, but still we're on the wrong track. I think there is a fundamental unease about uncertainty, and if you look overseas, you got Russia, you got ISIS, you got Ebola, and people are just, I think the technical term is freaked out. And they feel that America is not the preeminent economic power it was, and that maybe the way the world is developing, it won't be again, and that we certainly can't will security with ISIS or with Putin. And it may be possible that we're on for a period of time when there will be no successful president. That we live in. I think people look to the president and say, "Make it go away, make this stop, make things better. I want to feel secure. I don't want to think that we could have another recession again." And that the expectations, or maybe better put, the desires that we have for the president in a system that doesn't give the president as much power as the prime minister would have, are kind of out of step. And therefore, it may be very hard, whoever wins next time, it's like be careful what you ask for, to meet these expectations in a world which I think is only going to get more uncertain than not.
But, I think you could go back through history, and every era has its own definition of uncertainty and the pace of change and the upheaval that
Right.
places on society. And they would argue that this may be no different, other than perhaps the pace of change. So let me come to the differences you see with now. What are they principally? What is it a pace thing? Is it the fact that our politics are broken, trust in government and other institutions? What's happening now?
Well, I think it's all happening at once. There are times when the 60s were a time of upheaval and so on, but I still think there was a faith in the general American cycle. Things would go up, things would go down, but then they would go up again. And Reagan ran on Morning in America, even though it wasn't Morning in America, according to the numbers. But he got people to believe it was Morning in America. I think there's something about the American electorate now that is not amenable to believing that, whether it's true or not. I think there's a disinclination. And I think it's because partly the pace of change in life has gotten much quicker. I just know from my own industry, the media, that things change so fast that you don't have a sense of security. At Mother Jones, as soon as we feel we have things moving along right and we know how to work the social media and get our traffic up and how to compete with others to get eyeballs for our good high-quality journalism, that's a plug, motherjones.com, we worry, though, that like Facebook will change the algorithm, or some 12-year-old kid in Sheboygan is going to invent an app that's going to change everything for everybody.
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what it's like if you're in a manufacturing sector or in a tech sector, that things can move and change so fast that even if you feel you're getting the society or the economy is getting some motivation and getting some steam, that it can all go away. And I think, at the end, the Cold War, for all the problems, gave us sort of a pretty firm perspective on how to think about the world. Since then, and I think the Iraq invasion has made this a lot worse, obviously. People look around and they just feel very insecure about all these threats, real or imagined. Look how freaked out people got about Ebola. How many cases in Ebola in America have there been since that Liberian fellow died? There have been 3, 2 nurses who treated him and 1 doctor who came back. And yet we act like it, and then the Republicans used this in the campaign. They were able to effectively use, 1 case of Ebola in a fear-mongering fashion and tie it in with ISIS and the border, the southern Mexican border. It was absolutely stunning.
You mentioned Reagan and the idea of Morning in America, and let me come to this president. How much do you think this president deserves blame for both the lack of policies that could get at the underlying uncertainty and the projection of more clarity and confidence around where this nation is headed?
I assume this is probably a pretty Obama-friendly crowd, so I would choose my words carefully. I wrote a piece the night of the election that was called Campaign 2014, Obama's Failure to Communicate. Now, I didn't blame it all on him, but I do think that one failing he has had in the last 6 years, while I think he's got tremendous policy successes, whether it was a stimulus bill, health care reform, saving the auto industry, stuff on, he had a tax cut in his stimulus bill in the first year. There was a tax cut for the bottom 90% of Americans. There was a poll taken in 2010, the next year, in which only 10% of Americans believed he had delivered a tax cut. Now, you got to ask yourself, why is that? And, part of the reason is his inability or his failure to fully convey what he's done. I think he has believed that results speak for themselves. And in our cluttered, chaotic media environment, I don't think that takes you too far. And I did a book called Showdown about Obama's fight with the Republicans after the 2010 election. And in it, I quote David Axelrod, who, a very smart guy at your institute, who started your institute, your boss, so I'll be careful too. But I quoted him saying, we know we did a bad job, talking about the 2010 elections, in communicating our successes. And they said, we're going to do better. Well, I talked to one White House person on election day, and they said, yeah, we know we haven't done so good at this, and we're going to do better. Well, obviously it wasn't David, because he's not there now. But I think they haven't quite figured out how to, and it may be that it's not figure outable. And in that the media, universe is so diverse now, I think it's very hard for the president to get a platform and speak in a very broad, general way that registers with people, particularly when things are highly polarized and you have an opposition that is devoted to making, politics and the information community about politics look like a complete mess because they feel they benefit from that.
I want to get deeper into the dynamic between the president and the congressional leadership that he faces now post-election. But let me stay with this communication piece, because the reality is, even though it may not be figure-outable, clearly the Obama campaigns figured it out. And I think there are a lot of people, Republicans and Democrats alike, who sort of say, how can you have this campaign apparatus that was so skilled, and in 2012, skilled in the face of a lot of numbers that were running counter to a predicted re-election of an incumbent president, and have an administration that seemingly struggles by comparison?
I think this is probably the question I get the most. And I think it's very frustrating, particularly to people who support the president, the Democrats outside of Washington. And, there are some partial explanations, but they're not fully satisfying. One is the campaigns are binary. Me and the other guy. You only have to look good next to the other guy, and what you get to talk about is really the type of person you are. I understand your values and your concerns and your needs more than this guy, which was the essence of the 2012 campaign. And you go on the attack, and you try to frame it about, look what he did, he got rid of jobs, look at what he says. And a campaign, I don't mean to be overly glib, but it really is a popularity contest. It's who America is picking to be its symbolic leader and the person who happens to run the government and the military. I mean, it's like we don't have kings and we don't have a parliamentary system. So we have everything kind of rolled into one. So it's a rather symbolic choice. And really, particularly in 2008, when Obama didn't have to really say much about, what he had done. You didn't have to defend much of his past record because it wasn't that long and extensive. Could talk about himself and his visions, his values, and how they interact and connect with you and yours, and how together we can move certain policies. Okay, that's a lot easier than negotiating budget deals with an obstructionistic Congress and coming up with half a loaf and selling it to people who say, I don't quite understand why you're not changing Washington the way you said you would. I also think he is going back to the communications piece, that he has underestimated the depth of the obstruction, even though he's the chief victim of it. And he has felt an obligation, and I know this firsthand, to rise above it in order to try to keep governing. And I think that's very noble on his part. But at the same time, he's lost the chance, and I think it's gone now, to tell to be the storyteller in chief, to say again and again and again, there's a reason why there's gridlock. It's not Congress's fault. It's Republicans in Congress. And to sort of create a framework where all these little, episodic battles are within a much larger frame. But he's been loath to do that because it's not his style, to get angry. He does want to try to bring people apart. And he does feel this responsibility to govern. And he did see, after the 2010 election, how he could still get a good second stimulus bill. They called it a tax cut package. He could get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. There were still things he could do without sort of going nuclear in terms of political response to the obstructionism. But I think it brought to a point where people look at Washington, they see it's a mess, and they really know just there's one guy there. They don't know who Mitch McConnell is. They barely know who John Boehner is. And they say, well, obviously you can't make this work. There's something wrong with you. And
let me give someone else or another party or something else a try.
Which doesn't make sense because polls show that gridlock in Washington is a chief concern of the public. But if you give the Republicans more power in Congress, you are only guaranteeing more gridlock. I mean, so it's a bit counterintuitive, But, votes are often cast by people, to put it charitably, in an impressionistic manner. They have an impression of what's going on. They feel strongly about that impression, and they vote to send a message, to convey what they feel. That's how a lot of people vote on both sides. And unless the president's out there, creating a different impression, which should be very hard to do. I'm not saying this is easy to do, and it might not even work. So what do I know? But if he's not countering these impressions, and it's and I think it really is hard to come up with these great communication strategies and actually do it while you're running the world and you're going through crises after crises after crises. I mean, David Axelrod could probably speak well to this. There are only so many hours in the day, and you think you got the website finally worked out, and then Putin invades Ukraine. Oh God, screw me. Why'd you do that? Because now, and the media rushes from one big story, which usually means one big fuck up, to the next. And so it's ISIS, and then it's Ebola, and now it's missing plane. How come Obama didn't find the plane?
All right, so now you have a dynamic where the Republicans have increased the majority in the House. They have also taken over control of the Senate. Mitch McConnell will be the majority leader by all indications in that chamber, Boehner in the House. What's likely to get done, if anything? How do you see the dynamic playing out on a political and policy level between these three figures, including the president?
Well, I still think they'll be able to name post offices. I think that will happen.
All right, just
but
write
I'm
this
not
down.
sure. Well, there are two, there's like what's going to happen in the next, 4 weeks in the lame duck session while the Democrats still control the Senate, and then what's going to happen after hell descends. And and the president has come up with a few things to take care of in the lame duck session. None of are as ambitious as they were in the 2010 lame duck session, where he actually got a lot done, a lot of progressive stuff. But he wants to reauthorize funding for ISIS and do a couple of other things. Then
will he move forward on immigration? You think he'll do the executive
well, that's the
action?
showdown. That's the big showdown here. I mean, it seems pretty damn clear to me that in the next 3-4 weeks, the House, which is and it's with a more emboldened Tea Party caucus, is not going to wake up and say, "Oh, that immigration reform bipartisan package that we kept butter up for a year and a half. Well, I guess now we'll give in." That's not going to happen. And so the president has sort of laid down a marker saying, if you guys don't take action, I'll do something. And he's talked about executive action on that doesn't deal with that whole bill, but would provide some deportation relief to certain people who are living and working here. Mitch McConnell and John Boehner have already come out and said, if you do that, well, that would poison the well. I feel like, well, show me where the well is to begin with. There hasn't been a well for years. It doesn't, and here's the question, can you poison a dry well? You put poison down a dry well, it really doesn't make much of a difference.
So you're not buying this idea that there's a new opening here?
In the last couple of days, I see, Mitch McConnell is a quasi-deal maker. All the deals that Obama has been able to reach in the last 2-3 years have really been because Mitch McConnell came in at the last minute and made something happen so that the Republicans wouldn't totally throw their party over the cliff. And if you've been paying attention to what the president and his team have been saying the last 3 or 4 days, they keep saying, well, we think we can work with Mitch McConnell. What's not in that equation? John Boehner. Because they tried with John Boehner several times. And they will tell, they tell me, they'll tell everyone, they've said this publicly, we think John Boehner would like to make deals, make a grand bargain on budget issues and so on. And in my book, I detail some of these efforts, but he, time and time again, when he gets close his Tea Party folks say, no, if you do that, you may lose your speakership. I think that's not true, and I've written long and extensively about that. But nevertheless, he's accepted that. And so one question now is whether he will move off that dime and whether Mitch McConnell will be able to nudge him or protect him if he does.
And what's their relationship like?
I think it's, I think it's been pretty good. They've worked, I think they each understand their own demands and needs. But the bigger issue, to get to your question, I don't want to duck the big question here, which is, politicians do what they do because of the political dynamics in which they believe they are operating. And I don't think this election changes the political dynamics for John Boehner. I think in a lot of ways it makes it worse. They're now more, they added Republicans to the House, and the Tea Party people are going to say, see, this is what happens. We obstruct the president, we don't pass an immigration reform bill, and we don't pay for that. In fact, we get rewarded. It's like, a toddler, it's like, this is great, I got away with something.
It's an endorsement of our tactics and our policies.
Yes, and we won back the Senate. So we worked with Ted Cruz to bollocks things up on Capitol Hill, and he has more friends now in the Senate, and he'll get a subcommittee. So all this talk about being able to come together and work on some deals, now there are certain things like trade deals, which a lot of Democrats probably won't like depending on the nature of the deal, which they may be able to work on. I mean, I do think that Mitch McConnell, likes to get things done. It's no fun going to work every day and not doing anything. And I think John Boehner would like to have one or two things done before he's either leaves or is forced out. So there may find some trade deal stuff, some small, patent reform. America is just like waiting for patent reform, right? I know it's an important issue. Yeah. But they'll find there'll be some of these sort of small smaller issues. But and each side says they want tax reform. But there's no way I think they can do tax reform and make it revenue neutral and not, try to work it towards their general policy of cutting taxes from the Republican side. So, and immigration reform, we go back to the fact that there was a bill passed, a bipartisan bill, but Mitch McConnell wasn't part of the team that passed it. So people say now, there was there was a bipartisan bill, just bring it to the House, and that's a great place to start from. No, this bill expires at the end of the year. If the House Republicans don't pass it, poof, it's gone, and you start from scratch with the Republicans now controlling the Senate, and Republicans like Ted Cruz, who don't want any immigration reform. All they want to do is just build walls, who will be out there ginning the right-wing talk machine, whether it's Sean Hannity or Rush Limbaugh, to make it harder for Mitch McConnell to negotiate a deal that now the Democrats can accept. So I hate to be pessimistic, but no, actually I like being pessimistic. I'm Jewish, what can I say?
There is something interesting tactically. The question I asked is the question that's on many people's mind around immigration, and that is, will the president follow through on his pledge to take this executive action? It seems to me he also could have said, there is a bill awaiting a vote, let it come to a vote, and if not, I'm prepared to take action. Meaning, just shifted the political burden for a moment. You know what I mean?
No, I think that'd be a good way to do it. And I think if he's going to, there are a lot of ways he can say, pass it by December 31st. He could say, come up with your own bill by February 1st. If you don't like this bill, make some, and I'm going to take an executive action that's going to be for 6 months or a year. Put a time limit on. And if you pass a bill, it will supersede this. There's a lot of ways to do that, but I think in some ways, the president needs to do it create this superstructure, this overall theme about how he's going to govern, how he's going to engage with these guys. And I think being a little bit on the forceful side won't hurt him here on this issue. And just, say something like, okay, guys, you have until December 30th. You don't want me to do this? Bring this bill up for a vote. Just bring it up for a vote. Now, we know in the House it will pass. And if you don't bring up for vote, make that the issue.
Yeah.
Make John Boehner's, remember the video of him saying the reason we don't have this is because his members say, it's too hard, it's too hard. Well, make him say that again and again and again. Because really to bring a point home to like the political consuming American electorate, you have to do it over and over and over again for people. And it has to be very basic. People are busy. They get a lot of conflicting information. It's very hard to cut through. But if you say again and again and again that Obamacare is destroying the healthcare system, people who are probably getting Obamacare say, oh my God, Obamacare is destroying the health system. And keep your government out of my Medicare. Right? Keep your government out of my Medicare. It's mine. It's not yours. It's not the government's. But that's, so you got to figure out how to make these points in a way that register and that set the, that sort of basically establish the landscape.
Yeah.
A lot of, it's like war. I hate to use these stupid metaphors, but it's like if you can define the battlefield and, you can often win the war if we're going to be fight on these terms versus those terms. And a lot of that stuff is up for grabs, as hard as it is to win the definitional wars.
Let's talk for a bit about 2016 because I think the campaign officially began about 72 hours ago. So we might I don't want us to be late on this.
No.
A lot of people say that the 2016 campaign will have a big effect on everything we're talking about and the jockeying for position within Congress and what gets done and what doesn't, et cetera, trying to deny the president's successes or the Republican success. Let me go to the field, and obviously the number one figure in this whole conversation on both sides is Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
How do you assess her likely candidacy and where she is in relation to the party and the country right now?
I mean, it's interesting. I think this would be an election where both sides talk about the same thing. Hillary, right? Both sides, we're happy. They say we're happy to talk about Hillary, and the Democrats will say we're happy to talk about Hillary. Okay, and she can be on the debate podium by herself, but I have no inside information about her intentions. I do know from talking to people who believe they do. That they all say there's no doubt she's running with the provision that something might happen or health-related, family-related between now and whenever she finally says yes that may cause her to not do this. So I think it's a pretty good working assumption for the purposes of our intimate conversation to say that she will probably likely run. And I think it's been a while since we've had a situation on the Democratic side where a candidate has been, so dominant in the early stage. When she ran in 2008, she was pretty dominant. There was this junior Democratic senator from Illinois who was interested. But also, there was a guy who had run for vice president, John Edwards. And there was also a guy who ran the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and who had run before for president, Joseph Biden. I mean, the field was, had folks in it. Yeah. She was dominant, but not as dominant as any field that would, if there is a field. I haven't even seen a field. But if there were to be a Democratic field, she would be far more dominant than she was in 2008, and also I think in any field we've seen for a long time, which is I think somewhat perturbing. I don't think it's a good thing for her to have. I don't think it's a good thing for her to have a cakewalk. I don't think it's good for the party not to have develop a bench. I think every camp she's run once before. She was there when Bill ran twice. So she has lots of experience. But, the competition of a primary almost always makes the person who wins better. And the issues will be different. The mood of the country will be different now. And so for her to have a really good test run if she is going to be the nominee, would only help. Even if there's, attacks on her and so on, we see years of politics show us that politicians can rise above those attacks pretty easily in the general election. So I think it's bad for a lot of different reasons. There's not a debate within the party. But I don't see at this point in time really any significant challenge. Elizabeth Warren is not running. Not only does she not want to run against Hillary Clinton, she doesn't want to run. I really believe it. She doesn't want to run for president.
Doesn't want to run now, or doesn't want to
Well,
run?
I think certainly not now, and then and in 6 years from now, she will be older too. And it's not as if she's waiting for that point in time. So we'll see how, there will be some Democrats. Someone will jump in. It can be Martin O'Malley, the outgoing governor from my home state. Maybe Andrew Cuomo, although I think there are only 7 people who like him, even though he just won. He's just not a very likable figure, which is tough to say about someone. But but there may be some people who run. I don't think Jerry Brown's going to run this time, although that'd be kind of fun to watch from afar. And Brian Schweitzer of Montana was thinking of running, but every time he opens his mouth, he makes Joe Biden look modest. I mean, it's like Schweitzer has more gaffes per moment than Biden does. He hits the 11 on the Biden scale. And so I have, you guys who, you've just read the New York Times or the Chicago Tribune or whatever, your guess is really as good as mine about any other Democrat who may challenge Hillary. And the real interesting question becomes, if, for any chance she doesn't run, what happens on the Democratic side?
Yeah.
And I have absolutely no clue or idea. Biden may run, but I don't think it'll be his time.
Let me flip to the Republicans.
Oh, this is a lot more fun.
And you wrote a piece on Rand Paul. He's in the mix. We have, speculation around Jeb Bush and Chris Christie and Rick Perry. And,
Marco Rubio.
Ben
Carson. The list goes.
Yeah. So as you see that field, who do you see emerging? Who do you see as
And
particularly
Donald Trump said he's seriously looking this time. That's what he said. That's what he said the other day. I mean, we joked on Hardball last time that it was like the clown car primary. Well, I think this time around it may be the 2 clown cars. As many clowns as you can get into a clown car, they may need 2 cars this time around.
Well, let me ask the question a little bit differently. If you are, if Hillary Clinton's running and she gets a nomination, who in the potential Republican field does she fear? Yeah.
Paul Ryan is the person who I would, if he gets in and at this stage of the game, and you made me make a bet, put a gun to my head, made me bet, I would bet on Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan ran once, as I said, that's really important, but he straddles the line between the Tea Party wing of the party, which is really not even the wing, it's the wing and the breast and the thigh of the party. That was pretty good, I just thought of that.
That's good.
But he gets the Tea Party gang.
We're going to see that show up on MSNBC.
He gets the
next
Tea
Monday.
Party gang, and he gets the business community, the establishment, that Washington established with the lobbyists, and he can appeal to those Republican suburban voters who don't like some of the more extreme parts of their party. He has shown not a strong inclination to get in there, but that might be strategic. He might just be laying low for the time and letting everybody else sort of take the slings and arrows. But you're going to have, I think, a pretty strong internal debate, if not civil war, within the Republican Party between, you got 3 guys in the Senate who are incredibly ambitious: Marco Rubio, Rand Paul, and Ted Cruz, and all who want to run. One of them will decide to be the anti-establishment candidate, and will try to blow up the Senate to prove that, if he has to. That's probably, smart crowd. That wasn't that hard a question, though. Marco Rubio will be like try to be the inside establishment, strong in national security, and Rand Paul will be something in between. He's from Mitch McConnell's home state. He can't go after him too much. He thinks he can try to, get some votes from libertarian independents or even libertarian populists with more of an anti-war perspective, although he's very calculating and can, he introduced a bill to cut off all foreign assistance, including Israel, and he completely ran away from that the first time people started complaining. So I'm not quite sure where he's going to go, but you got a couple governors out there who will do the I know how to govern thing, Scott Walker, maybe Chris Christie if he isn't indicted, Rick Snyder in Michigan, perhaps John Kasich, who just had a whopping win in Ohio, and they will be like their own block. They're like sort of like in high school, they're like the student government representatives. We know how to do things, but only one of them can get so far. And then there'll be a couple of outsiders, like maybe this Dr. Ben Carson, who just put on an hour-long infomercial documentary about him in Fox. He's very ambitious, and I think he wants to go through that opening, that gigantic opening that Herman Cain created last time. Just sort of the outsider. It's coincidental that they're both African-American conservatives, but he would run that same type of, I'm not a politician, I'm a doctor, I know, how to do these things. So anyway, but I think, the debate between Marco Rubio and Rand Paul just on foreign policy alone will make Bill Kristol's head explode.
Yeah.
That's not a bad thing.
I want to get to audience questions,
Sure.
but I can't do that until we spend a couple of minutes talking about what many people, and many people in the Romney campaign would agree to this as well, see as a pivotal, if not the pivotal moment in the 2012 presidential campaign. And that is this 47% video, the story that you broke from Mother Jones in September of 2012. Just to put all this in context and to take us back a couple of years, let's show that clip here now.
Sure. There are 47% of the people who will vote for the president no matter what. All right, there are 47% who are with him, who are dependent upon government, who believe that they are victims, who believe that government has a responsibility to care for them, who believe that they're entitled to health care, to food, to housing, to you name it. That it's an entitlement, and government should give it to them. And they will vote for this president no matter what. And I mean, the president starts off with 48, 49, 40, he starts off with a huge number. These are people who pay no income tax. 47% of Americans pay no income tax. So our message of low taxes doesn't connect. And he'll be out there talking about tax cuts for the rich. I mean, that's what they sell every 4 years. And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never convince them that they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives. What I have to do is convince the 5 to 10% in the Senate that are independent, that are thoughtful, that look at voting one way or the other depending upon, in some cases, emotion, whether they like the guy or not.
That video, I've heard from top advisors to Romney. They knew when that hit that was devastating. They didn't think that it was necessarily going to cost them the election ultimately, but they knew that was a dark day and arguably the darkest in their campaign. How did it come to be? What's the backstory that takes us to this?
Well, I know we want to get to questions, so I mean, I'll try to make this really brief. If you really care, I wrote an ebook, and I even wrote a shorter, though not so short, piece from Mother Jones explaining the whole narrative, and they're both easy to find on the internets. But basically, it came out in part because of the mission of Mother Jones, which is to look at things that other people aren't looking at. And while there was a lot of investigative digging into Romney and his business past, and whether what he'd done with companies that Bain Capital had taken over, whether they lost jobs, gained jobs, I realized that there was a sort of a side business to Bain Capital, which was an investment fund, and that Romney also was in charge of. And I started looking at the companies that they were investing in, and I found that he'd done some tremendously significant investments in companies in China, Brazil, and Mexico that were built to outsource jobs, manufacturing jobs from America. That was their whole business plan. And I did a series of stories on that that got some attention during the campaign, and it became part of that debate about his business past. But in the course of that, I really became focused on looking at his investments in China. And someone pointed out to me a small clip that had appeared on the internet showing him speaking to a group of people about a visit he made to a Chinese factory. And he was speaking in these very gee whiz terms, like, I went to this factory and there were 12 women in each room living together, 10 rooms to a bathroom, and there was a fence outside, not to keep them in, but to keep people from coming in, because everyone wanted a job in this factory. And like the person who had posted this anonymously, thought like he was like taking a light approach to near slave labor conditions. And there was this short clip, and I said, I want to find the whole clip to see, I wanted to figure out what company he was talking about, if he said anything more about China. And it took me a while to identify the anonymous Twitter feed of the anonymous poster of that clip. But when with the help of an opposition researcher who was sending me tips, who happened to be the grandson of Jimmy Carter, I didn't know this, we located the guy, and I started talking to him, and I said, do you have anything more on China on this clip? He goes, no, that's about it. But Romney does say some other interesting things. And then it took me 2 or 3 weeks to convince him to send me the tape and how I could use it. He was very worried about his safety and about losing his job, all the right concerns, and we spent a lot of time negotiating or just discussing how to make it available and try to give him some degree of anonymity, which actually did work. He stayed anonymous until the following April, when he outed himself, a bartender named Scott Prouty. And I think it was very courageous of him to do this, and he put himself really in the line of fire. But really, it was just the product. I go to journalism classes, and I love telling the story much longer with a lot more drama, but because the real lesson here is you just do good investigative enterprise reporting, like we try to do at Mother Jones, and you never actually always know where it's going to lead you. I got a lot of good stories on what I thought I would get. I mean, it was right to look at this investment fund, but it really got me to something that I didn't know existed. And it got me, which is the height of journalism, behind a closed door to show people who can't afford to pay $50,000 a plate what life is really like in those circumstances. And in the age of video, we actually showed. We didn't tell. We showed what it was like. And so there was no denying. I mean, just imagine what would have happened had I gotten just 5 people in the room to tell me he said that. Or even if I had a transcript that someone had written down. The impact would have hopefully been big, but not nearly as big. And imagine the denials from the other side. But it was the fact that it was video, in his own words. And I really think, and I'm sure he kicks himself for doing this, the fact that he put a number on it made all the difference. It was that precision. If he had said, nearly half, or a lot of Americans, I mean, the intent and the sentiment would have been exactly the same. That he really believed that almost half of Americans don't take personal responsibility for themselves. But the fact that he put a number on it so fit in with that sort of robotic, numbers-crunching image, persona, and distant persona that he had, that I hate to use this cliche, it was like a perfect storm of a metaphor for him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's take questions from you in the audience, and we will get microphone over to you. So there is one, and let's see.
We will be choosing the questions via microphone. I'm sorry, we don't have time for everybody.
Yeah, we'll try to get to as many as we can. If you can, keep your questions short.
Thank you. I just wondered if you could tell me what you think about the future of labor, in organized labor in this country. Yeah.
I think it's really tough. I think, the SEIU and the service workers are doing great on the industrial unions, steel workers and such. They just keep losing members. It's really, Tom Perez, who I think is a great Secretary of Labor. I'm sorry he wasn't picked to be AG. today, but he is, he's working hard. But really, this is an effort that has to be from the ground up. It's how the labor movement was built, and I know they're trying to figure out how to do this. Global competition, it's tough, and I don't see any real good natural openings. It's been a lot of hard work. But again, looking at AFSCME, SEIU, these people are indeed trying to work hard to do this.
I want to put in a shameless plug for the Institute of Politics. On Thursday night, 6 p.m. In Hyde Park, we are doing a conversation on that very question with many of the top labor union leaders in the country. And it's free and open to the public. 6 o'clock, Quadrangle Club, University of Chicago. We have a question back here. Yeah.
My question is whether you take seriously the idea that climate change is something that is destabilizing us without our
Well, that's a really good
realizing
question,
it.
because I think in some ways it may not be in the back of people's mind, but it may be kind of part of denial, and not the type of denial in which they say this science isn't real, which the Koch brother funded groups and others try to make that claim. I think it's so overwhelming and a big issue that a lot of people are just saying, well, it's something we can't really get our hands around. And in places like, to me, it's just me, but Colorado, just elected a guy who doesn't believe in human-induced climate change. Colorado, which depends on certain weather patterns, for whether it's the skiing industry or the outdoors industry, where the people are very sensitive to the outdoors. In Colorado, if you ask people what do, they don't say I'm an accountant. They say I kayak. Seriously. And if you ask them what they do, they go, I go to an office. They don't, it's really about being outdoors. And yet they just elected someone who truly denies climate change. And in fact, all the new Republican senators are in that boat. And the guy who's now in charge of the Senate Environment Committee, Inhofe from Oklahoma. We could do this for an hour, but I'll just tell one story because you'll probably get a kick out of it. And that is at the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, whenever it was. I was there covering it for Mother Jones, breaking some good stories with Kate Shepard, who was working for us at the time. And Inhofe was there, basically to get press attention, to be Peck's bad boy. And at one point, I walked up to him, and in the press room, I said, "Can I talk to you?" He said, "Sure." I go, "We are surrounded, literally, by thousands of scientists and thousands of people from governments who believe this is real and happening and they want to do something about it. People who think their island nations are going to, not survive the next 20 years. You say it's a hoax and it's not real? So why are all these people here?" And you know what he told me? He said it's really because of Hollywood liberals. Hollywood liberals have perpetuated a hoax. They've gotten scientists involved because they want population control and radical environmentalism. I said, like who? And he said, Barbra Streisand. I said, like when she's not making Yentl? She came up with this great idea? I know, I'll get 50,000 climate change scientists to do this for me. Ed Begley Jr., he's biking to the meetings. But this guy is now in charge of the Environment Committee. And so, this is something that is just like the labor movement is just going to have to be fought over and over again over the next 10, 20 years if we have a chance of not reaching a tipping point.
I think we have time for one last one back here.
Here.
Oh, here, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I didn't know there was another.
The question for both of you. In this internet age, how do you raise the awareness of young people who don't read newspapers and don't listen to NPR, or other media outlets, and they're not voting? So how do you address and how do you reach that audience?
We were just talking about this, actually, an aspect of this before we went up here. Do you want to
Well,
take a crack at it?
the core strategy of politics is you have to reach people where they are, not where you are. Okay, and that covers just basically anything. So young people today are not listening to NPR. They're not watching cable TV. My network tries to put some younger folks on in the afternoon, and the ratings aren't that great because young people don't watch TV. They watch video. They watch things they see on Facebook, and and the Obama campaign showed in 2008 and 2012, even 2012, that they're, with the right amount of effort, you can reach them politically. From a media perspective, how the New York Times, Mother Jones, or the National Review reaches younger readers as opposed to voters or viewers, it's very hard. They don't consume media by media products. They don't go to like the New York Times homepage. They are consuming in a communal fashion through social media. Their friends see something, you send it to them. They have Twitter streams, Facebook streams, Instagram, Tumblrs, and that's how they get it. So you need to find a way to enter those streams to reach them. At the same time, and I have a whole speech on this which I won't descend upon you now. At the same time, a big problem is that we in this room all grew up thinking of let's call it public affairs consumption as a discrete individual activity. You read the newspaper in the morning. You watch the network news at 6:30. Maybe you watch a CBS documentary. And maybe you read Mother Jones or the Weekly Standard when you go to the John or when you go to the beach or something. But you have these discrete moments when you say to yourselves, I am reading news. I'm reading a nonfiction book. But now everybody gets things, most everybody, through the same fire hose. So while you're looking for news, you're getting a Facebook message from a friend. You're watching what's being said on Twitter. You're shopping online. You're doing your homework or work online. You're deleting 300 emails you don't want. And then, oh, look, did you see that video of a monkey juggling frogs? This is unbelievable. I got to send this to 23 people. And so the news that you get in that environment is disjointed, comes in pieces, in packets, in bits. And I think, my bias is that doesn't lead to good absorption. And it's like watching TV. It's like jumping from TV station to TV station, and you go from the Blacklist for 10 minutes to then MSNBC for 5 minutes, and then PBS, and then you go to the shopping network, and that doesn't, that drives everyone crazy, and it doesn't. But that's the media. That's the information architecture that we operate in. And nobody yet, I think, has figured out a good way to sort of replicate what you'd like to see replicated. It's a big issue for campaigns and for us in the media.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would just add one small coda because I want to get to the last question. That is, I think this conversation, writ large in society, is focused so much on the supply side. That is to say, how are news organizations and other media entities reacting and responding to all the trends that David talked about? It's an important question, but it's only half the equation. I think what's been lost is the conversation on the demand side. Citizenry, how actually young people are even being connected to sort of news and what it is and its function and journalism and civics and all of that. That's largely absent. There are efforts to try and return it to secondary education and others. But I think there's an important question for us in society to ask around creating demand for information, even in its sort of iterative and bifurcated form that helps us navigate the world as citizens. One last question.
We have
here.
time for one more.
Yeah, this is.
I'd like to go back to the state elections. And it seemed that even though the Republicans took so many states, there were so many positive, progressive initiatives and ballot issues that came out. How do you reconcile those things, and what does it foretell?
That's a great question.
Yeah, and not so many, but some. Okay, the 4 states passed state referendum ballot initiatives to increase the minimum wage in their states. There were 2 voting rights measures that would have restricted voting rights, in certain ways in Missouri and Montana, early voting and saying they were defeated. And then, if you call it progressive, there were several pro-pot pieces that passed. And there was one gun control in one state in Washington. background checks. And to me, the 4 minimum wage referenda all passed in red states, like Alaska. There's one in Nebraska, I think. The other 2 don't come to mind right now, but maybe you know. But they all were red states. And some of them same states elected Republican senators who don't support the minimum wage. So other than say, are you people crazy? I don't know how much to make of that, other than then that it goes back to what I said earlier about impressions. People have impressions about politicians and the people who they're voting for in terms of leadership that often are not connected to policies and what those people would actually do. It's what they think of the person, how they present themselves, how they talk about issues, rather than where they exactly stand on issues. In Colorado, another good example, they defeated a personhood amendment. I assume most of you know what that is. But yet Cory Gardner, who was elected senator, used to be in favor of the personhood bill. So again and again, they contradict themselves. 80% of Americans want to see background checks, right? Most Americans, from the 50 to 80% range, support the key individual provisions of Obamacare. 80% of Americans support minimum wage. You can go, we hear this over and over again. Yet that's not reflected in their voting choices. So it gets back to the nature of campaigns and whether you can convince people that the policies matter. Abortion, again, most Americans support legal abortion. Almost all the Republicans who won would like to criminalize abortion in most cases. So, it's up to the people who think they're on the winning side of these issues to find that connection and do it well with good leadership. But good last question, because what does this leave us with? What's that word? Hope. This leads us with hope. Americans want to see what most of us, I think, in this room, but at least hope for the Democrats. They want to see what the Democrats stand for. So that means it's not game over. It means that unlike a lot of us in 2008 thought that election was it, that decided the way America was going to be for the next 20 years. No, what's the lesson? Fight's never done. We go back and forth. Hope goes up, hope goes down, and and the game is still going on.
And you said you were a pessimist. I'm so glad that we...
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Steve. Thank you to the Chicago Humanities Festival. I'm so glad I'm here. Thank you for coming. And if anyone has any really quick questions, I have to go somewhere soon, but just, let's meet over here, and I'll,
Ladies and gentlemen,
do that.
David Korn of Mother Jones. David, thanks again.
Thank you, Steve.